The human brain, the way it has developed, it has gone through conditioning, deep layers of conditioning. And because of this conditioning, the brain is not able to see clearly what is true and what is false. Of course, there are certain conditionings which are biological, which are connected with our survival. Like we may be liking certain food, we are conditioned through our languages. So there are some factual aspect of conditioning, but much more deeply, there are psychological aspects. When we start identifying ourselves psychologically with a certain conditioning, whether I am living in a certain country or belonging to certain religion. So when the brain starts taking pride in a certain conditioning and isolating itself, that becomes a psychological conditioning. And that binds us, that limits us. When we start believing, taking certain conditionings as the truth, and we say that, I am this, you are that, and I firmly believe in that. So this leads to this psychological division between human beings. And when we do not question these conditionings, we live out those conditioning, those influences. And when we are living life without being aware of the fact of conditioning, we are actually living life in darkness or ignorance. That's why it is essential to learn about this fact of conditioning and to explore if there is a freedom from the conditioning. And what does it mean to be free from the conditioning? One question is that, do we see the great limitation of living with any psychological conditioning? And do we see the danger of living with the conditioning? Because it limits our vision of life. We are unable to see things as they are clearly. And the first step towards freedom is to be aware of the fact of our conditioning. If we are not aware that we are imprisoned in our own conditioning, then there is no question of freedom. It is so important to explore our present state of living. And in order to explore, we need to have tools of exploration which are not conditioned. Because if we are exploring with a tool which is also conditioned, then we remain in that field only analyzing about it. So thinking process contributes to this conditioning and maintains this conditioning. So first of all, we have to look at this tool of thought, which we all use universally. Every human being on this earth thinks. Thinking is global, universal. I may be thinking about certain thing, you may be thinking about something else. What we are thinking about, that is secondary, but we are all thinking. And the nature of thinking is that it is always rooted in the past. Thought is a process of memory. And without memories, we cannot think. Actually, thinking is a movement of memory. And we can say that memory itself is thinking. And the brain is educated through evolution to process these memories. And we need it for our survival, to learn a language, to travel, to cook our food. Physical level, we need this survival tool of thought. The same tool which is so useful in the physical world becomes a source of problem in the psychological world. So if we are using the same tool in order to inquire into life, into the nature of conditioning, then we are not able to go very far. We will remain in the same circle. So that's why we are asking this question, if there is any other tool. And Krishnamurti talks about it, that there is a tool of awareness. There is a tool of attention. We can be aware of our own conditioning as it is. And the nature of this awareness is choiceless, non-selective. Because what happens when we become aware of something, usually there is a reaction to the what is, to the fact. And this is how thought meets a fact. And when thought is meeting a fact, it is usually reacting to it. And there are certain ways of reaction. The first is thought labels it. And the second is, after labeling, there is a judgment about the fact that this is good, this is bad. And this judgment is usually on the basis of my past conditioning. And then thought decides to act for it or against it. So this is a whole process of meeting the fact through the tool of thought. And it is actually reaction, labeling, judging, and then taking an action. And usually thought is aimed at finding more and more security and pleasure. So thought is always meeting a fact with this intention of finding more security, more pleasure. And Krishnamurti says that this is not awareness. Awareness is a totally different energy. It's a totally different tool. When there is an awareness, there is no judgment about it, whatever we are seeing. Awareness is not the thinking process. It is not based on that. So this choiceless awareness is a faculty, is not conditioned. And through this choiceless awareness, there can be an exploration of our life, of ourselves. And part of this choiceless awareness is this deep listening. And this listening is not simply hearing, because we have this hearing capacity, but that is only one part of this listening. This deep listening is not thinking. So can we be aware how we listen usually? We usually listen with the background of our knowledge, our past experiences, and our listening is actually very limited. And we are usually not aware of the limitation of our own listening. So, is there a deep listening which is not based on thought? In this listening, there is a total passion. There is a listening from our whole being. And in this listening, there is no comparison happening. There is no judgment happening. And this listening is not happening from the ego or the me. When we are listening through this observer, through the me, then that me or the observer is influencing what is being listened. So it will listen according to its own interpretation. So when we are listening through this background of the ego or the observer, we are actually not listening, we are reacting. Thought is reacting. So the deep listening happens when this observer, the ego, is silent. And we have to understand, when does this observer become silent? Because we cannot make the observer, the ego, silent by force. This whole inquiry cannot be done with any force. This is a process of understanding. When we understand something as it is, it becomes silent. When we understand this observer or the me, this also becomes silent. So we have to understand this whole process of the observer, how it comes into being. Is observer or the ego a fixed entity? Or it is a process created by thought? Krishnamurti says that this ego or the observer comes into existence through the activity of thought. Without thought, there cannot be ego or the observer. And this we have to really understand deeply. When thought reacts, in that reaction, observer is born or the ego is born. Like when I am identifying, when thought is identifying itself with a country, with a religion, with property or anything, in that identification, the ego is born. Without that identification, can there be ego or the I? So whenever there is a comparison, in that comparison, the I is born. Without comparison, there cannot be I. So this I comes into existence through the various activities of thought. Whenever thought creates an image about oneself or the other, that image is the I. So this I is a bundle of images. We live with so many images. And each image is an I. And this is created by a thought process. And it is always based on the past. It is never connected with the very present moment. Thinking process itself is a psychological time. Whenever we are thinking, it is always in terms of past, present, or future. And this is how, through time, the observer is created. And this is useful in our day-to-day physical survival. But the same observer becomes a source of suffering in the psychological field. So whenever we are meeting life through this channel of the observer or the ego, life is very different. It is always confined within past memories. So the question is, can we meet life not from the ground of the observer? Because as long as we are meeting life from the ground of the observer or the ego, we are only reacting. We are not living in the now. And we cannot find truth or love or beauty in the past or future. It has to be in the very living moment. And whenever we are listening from this past background, which is the ego, we are not actually listening. The total listening happens when this whole past background is silent. And it becomes silent by listening. So this may look paradoxical. The more we listen to the noise of the mind, to the noise of the ego, the more it becomes silent. And the more it becomes silent, the listening becomes deeper. So they support each other. Listening helps the brain become quiet. When the brain becomes quiet, it enters into the depths of listening. And that's why in this listening, there is no limit. And in this listening, there is no ego. That's why listening itself is an act of love. When there is no ego, when the center is not dominating our day-to-day life, our living, then that space is love. So that's why this total listening is total passion, passion without any object. And this total passion is part of this deep love, love which is not created by thought or desire. This very act of listening is love, because in this there is no judgment, there is no comparison, there is no any motive to achieve anything. That's why Krishnamurti often said, listening is transformation. When we listen totally, completely, that very moment of listening can be transformative. This listening itself is an action. When we listen completely, totally, then what is truth and what is false can be seen. If something is being said which is false, it will be listened to and it will be dropped. There will be no place of false in the complete listening. And if there is a listening to truth, that truth will remain on its own. So this listening itself is an action. It's not an activity of the ego. In this listening, one can listen to oneself. Whatever the mind is telling, the stories, creating images, all the noise which goes on inside, one can listen to it. And in this listening, all the noise of the mind subsides naturally. And one can listen to the other human being. One can listen to the nature. One can listen to the birds, to the rivers. There are no limits to this listening. There is a beautiful story that there was a seeker who had started exploring these deeper questions of life. And he had read a lot. He had visited so many teachers, and then he went to a monastery, and he was rather confused with his knowledge. So much knowledge he had acquired about spirituality. And so he met the teacher of the monastery, and he said that I know so much about those philosophical spiritual books, but I feel rather confused. I don't know where to begin. So the teacher listened to that young student, and he smiled and said, forget everything. Do you see there is a river flowing by the monastery? He said, yes. Just start by listening to that river. Don't do anything. Just learn about listening. What is listening and how do you listen to that river? Begin from there. So I think this is a very profound invitation. What these teachings are offering is to really deeply listen. Listen to everything, not only just to the teachings, because teachings are in our daily living, the way we live life. Teachings are not outside, teachings are within oneself. So, can there be a total listening to whatever one is doing? And this listening itself is a great energy. It's an immediate transcendence of the conditioning. Because we may think that if we are so conditioned deeply, then is there any freedom? And the freedom is this deep listening. The moment the mind becomes deeply interested in exploring, finding out what is really truth and what is false, this deep interest brings this quality of listening. And once we see the significance of total listening, then that listening immediately transcends this conditioning. I feel this is really a great freedom. Listening itself is a freedom. In that listening, there is no barrier because there is no me operating in that act of listening. This is an instant freedom, if I can say, instant transcendence of the conditioning in this listening. And I think these teachings are inviting to really listen out of this deep freedom, and which is possible at any moment.